How's it going, everyone? It's Ben Foggins Media Corner back again with a brand new video for today. And to continue on with my review of The Last of Us series, of course, I'm here to review episode 8. This episode was directed by Ali Abbasi, and in this episode we see that Ellie is taking care of Joel after he got injured, and from there she meets up with this man named David, who's played by Scott Shepherd, and James, and for James, he just so happens to be played by the original Joel himself, Troy Baker, which that is really interesting. And we see that he runs a group and he wants vengeance against Joel and Ellie since they were responsible for the death of one of the members of the group. And we see that Ellie gets captured by David, and we see her trying to fight for survival. And from there we see that Joel is recovering from his injury, and he's determined to try and find and rescue Ellie. So that's pretty much the story of The Last of Us episode 8. Now, the last episode I thought was a really beautiful yet heartbreaking episode that was based off the DLC of the game, where in that episode we do get to learn about Ellie's past, and I thought all of that was beautifully well captured in that episode. But for this episode, I can definitely describe this one for being a really faithful episode, but also I found this one to be really dark and yet very brutal at the same time here. Also in this episode, there are no clickers or any of the infected whatsoever. This one is about person against person, and I found all of that to be really intense. And yet it is often that we don't really see in The Last of Us, which is the violence, because as I've already mentioned before about this series, it isn't really about the zombies or the deaths. It's about these characters and the emotions that they often do play out with themselves here, with this whole world that they are living in and they're struggling with, which that's what I really love about this show here. And this also in this episode, we are introduced to the character of David, who's played by Scott Shepherd, whom he is really, really good in this episode. And he may seem very nice at the very start, but later down the line, he is an absolute monster inside. Like, what he wants to do with Ellie isn't really to kill her, it's just giving her a different fate that is just much worse than death. And that is just really, really just so messed up for like what he wants to do to Ellie. And you are really finding yourself really rooting for Ellie in this episode here, because you just want her to survive this whole situation here that she's facing through. And you're also finding yourself really rooting for Joel, because as we see him recovering from his injury, he is determined to try and find Ellie, and he comes across a bunch of other characters who are part of this group that David holds, and we see him asking them like, where's Ellie and all that. And I thought all of that was beautifully well captured. And as for Bella Ramsey's performance as Ellie in this episode, this is definitely another one of the best performances I've ever seen from Bella Ramsey here in the show. Like, what Ramsey was able to pull off in this episode here was just absolutely incredible. From the way that Ellie reacts, the way she feels intimidated, and the way she gets really, really like angry and mad for some of the line deliveries. All of that was just so powerful, and yeah, I thought all that was just absolutely incredible. And every single line delivery that was played out in this episode here was just so beautifully well captured, from being just exactly like the games, but also throwing in some new ones as well that are not like from the games, which that's what I also love about the show here, because the show does manage to be really faithful like the games while having a few changes here and there, and that's what I really love about this show here. And even when it comes to the whole finale, when we do see like Ellie trying to fight off on her own, it is really scary, and yeah, I really fell for it, because for Ellie, her biggest fear is that she's being alone, and that's what she doesn't want to go through that again. But when we do get to see the whole like fight between Ellie and David, it is really, really brutal and yeah, very intense. And once when we do get to see like Ellie reuniting with Joel, it is so deeply emotional here, and yeah, I just absolutely adored that moment. So all in all, episode 8 of The Last of Us, as I said, it was definitely a really faithful episode, but it's also one I found to be really dark and yeah, very brutal at the same time. And there's not even a single thing that they managed to ruin out of this episode here, because everything about this episode was just so spot on here. So that's pretty much all I have to say about episode 8 of The Last of Us. I'm going to give The Last of Us episode 8 5 out of 5. Yep, like I said, there was not even a single thing that they managed to ruin out of this single episode here, because as I said, this was definitely a really faithful episode here, but also one I found to be really, really dark and yeah, very, very brutal at the same time here as well. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my review of episode 8 of The Last of Us, and let me know what you think of this episode. If you have seen this episode already, did you absolutely love this one, or were you very disappointed by this episode? As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and this has been Foggins Media Corner signing off.